Here we go.
Start us off.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another MLU Behind the Scenes. Today, I am joined by Gravity Films 4, creator of Spider-Man Amazing Fantasy, and we're going to be going over the first season of the show today.
That's right. You know, this series is it's gonna be great because most of this is just gonna be me and you talking about MLU video.
Yep.
When we inevitably get around to Iron Man.
Yeah, it seems to be going that way. Although I was not present for the last one with Hawkeye, so
That's true.
That spiced it up a little bit. But we have a lot to talk about today. I've prepared a plenty of questions.
I'm eager to hear them all.
Some that I'm sure we've discussed in private before, but for the sake of the viewers, bring them back up.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Well, to start us off, pretty basic. Obviously, there is a lot of inspiration from comics and other media in this series. Some probably apparent, some less so. So I'd just like to hear what were the comics, the films, the TV shows that inspired this take on Spider-Man.
So it was a lot of, you know, your very basic Spider-Man origin elements. Like I knew I wasn't interested in like reinventing the wheel here. Like I knew I wanted to do something that was simple but like to the point. And so I think if there was any like one version of the character that probably inspired this the most, it was probably the Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield. Because one element I was like specifically wanting to bring to the table, and in hindsight I think I could have done a little bit better with it, but I wanted to present this idea that Peter Parker is not that nice of a guy. I think a lot of my issues with and it's a small issue granted, but I wanted to feel like Peter Parker was a character that had a lesson to learn. It wasn't him being mean to Flash one time and his uncle getting shot wasn't like a freak accident. It wasn't like this thing that, you know, he didn't mess up one time and then his whole life was changed. Like it was a pattern of behavior. And that's what led to, like, you know, there needed to be a lesson to learn. And I didn't think it would hit as much if it wasn't, like I said, a pattern of behavior. And that was, you know, that was just taken right from the source of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Because I feel like that's kind of lost in modern Spider-Man. And again, you know, it's a smaller thing. But I do think it makes a difference in, like, the way that the emotions feel.
Sure, yeah. No, definitely. There has been, like, I feel like more recent takes on Spider-Man have been more sympathetic.
Yeah.
So...
Which is not bad. Like, you know, I think Nice Spider-Man is fun and good, and there's a lot of like good stories that have been done with that. I mean, like, I just think that for the specifics of the origin, I think it's kind of required. Yeah.
So you were mainly inspired by some of the original run with that.
Yeah. And like there was some other like kind of outside like. That was like the big thing. I mean, there's always like outside motivation from just other things, but not necessarily anything too specific. More just like general movies and TV shows that I was watching at the time. Like obviously this is kind of a slower burn of a show, and so, you know, I think at the time I was watching like Breaking Bad and like Damien Chazelle movies, and those like that's some stuff that I kind of remember being like kind of interested in that vibe.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's outside influence as well. That's interesting. Definitely. Also, I've noticed like music choices. There's been kind of a variety of different Spider-Man projects involved. Definitely, I've noticed some of the Raimi score in there. Some of the more modern. I think you've used some of the Tom Holland movies score, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've pulled from a lot of different places. Definitely in this season, definitely Raimi, definitely like the TASM score, definitely some MCU stuff. Because It's as far as soundtracks for Spider-Man movies goes, they hit it pretty good most of the time. Like there's a lot of good stuff to pull from, and I definitely wanted this to, I am a Spider-Man fan, and I like almost every iteration of the character for at least some reason. Like I don't think there's a version of the character that I just straight dislike. And so I kind of wanted to try and incorporate different elements from everybody in some way.
Oh yeah. So kind of going off of that, were there any like changes or deviations you knew you wanted to make from the source material?
So one big thing that didn't go through, but it was like a consideration, was that Peter was going to tell Uncle Ben about his powers. Like he was going to show him what had happened.
Oh.
And because that was like a big concern I had, was like, it's not going to be different enough. Like I'm not doing anything particularly different. And I was worried that was going to kind of drive people away, or that people wouldn't necessarily be interested in it because it wasn't doing anything specifically different. And so I had this whole idea that Peter would go to Uncle Ben with his powers and he'd be all excited and he'd show him. And then that would kind of like him learn, like Uncle Ben learning about what Peter was doing with his powers would be the thing that spirals them into that conversation that they ultimately have.
Oh, I see.
But I kind of thought that it lost a bit of the magic by it would have lost a bit of the magic by doing that. I like the idea that Uncle Ben doesn't know what's wrong. He knows that he knows something is wrong, but he doesn't know what. And he's, I think it's more subtle if he doesn't know what's going on, because he's just seeing a change that he doesn't think is gonna be good for Peter, and he just tries to guide him in the right way, in a very fatherly way.
Right.
And then I had ideas of like potentially trying to deviate away from the wrestling origin. It kind of just ended up coming down to like I didn't really know what to replace it with, and maybe if I would have done this now, I would have been a bit differently. But at the time, I was like, yeah, the wrestling works. And I think it does work. It's like I said, maybe now it would be a little bit different, but that's just kind of how time is.
Yeah. No, I think the origin works well, and I think, well, actually, I'm going to save that for later. I've got more of a question related to that, but we'll get there. So for now, though, kind of on a more personal note, what kind of inspired you to make a Spider-Man show, and more so, like, what interests you about Spider-Man as a character?
Right. So pretty much from the very beginning of my YouTube career, I've always been interested in Spider-Man. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've always liked superheroes, so it's a little hard to say exactly, but I'm pretty sure Spider-Man was the first like superhero that I ever found out about as a kid, and he's always just been a very like prominent part of my upbringing. I mean, I feel like I kind of grew up in like a golden age of superhero content. Like, I mean, especially Spider-Man content. I mean, at the time that I was coming up, it was like Spectacular Spider-Man was on the air. The 90s show was still doing reruns. Like the Raimi films were coming out, and then like, and this was all in my youth. And so like, I think by the time I get to like my teenage years, it's like the MCU films are popping off, and he's always just been a very present. And truthfully, I don't think I actually found exactly what I liked about the character outside of just the general vibe until honestly like after this first season. But I really like the idea, and this is kind of a consistent thing with all the Marvel characters, but I really like the idea of a character that in his heart is not a bad person, but he is constantly fighting the urge to do selfish things. Because I think it's a very like human thing to deal with, and it's like I think incorporating that into the standard cliches of normal superhero content there's just like ripe with potential.
Yeah.
And definitely in this season, I wanted I wanted a chance to explore that. I mean, that was the big thing. That was like the one thing I had when I was making the season. I was like, okay, I'm not necessarily doing, like I said, I'm not reinventing the wheel, and I wasn't trying to. The one thing I can do is not rush through this, because that was kind of my thought process. Like, we've never seen or at least the one that I've seen it. I felt like we hadn't gotten to look at the origin in like an actual fleshed out way, because it felt like stuff that people always wanted to gloss over, because admittedly it's not the most interesting parts of the character. Like the most fun stuff to come out of the character was always going to be, you know, the adventures and the actual elements that make him a superhero. But I think he's got a really cool origin. I think it's a really interesting story, and I think it's a really like in a lot of ways like relatable story. And so I wanted to just take some time and actually flesh out these characters. I mean, my overall goal was to make it so that when Uncle Ben dies, it's like you're sad because you've actually gotten to know him as a character.
Yeah.
Like you've actually gotten to experience him and Peter's relationship through both of their eyes. And so that was the main sort of driving inspiration for this season. For sure.
And I definitely like how we kind of take our time. We get to have that, you know, that time with Ben, which you don't usually get.
Yeah.
You know, you get to kind of sit with these characters for a bit before it happens. And I like that. Because that definitely allows you to connect with them better. Yeah. So, obviously, you know, like Spider-Man is a very important character for you and one of your favorite superheroes. But besides Spider-Man, was there a favorite character in this season that you enjoyed writing? I think I could probably guess, but...
So, Ben definitely, like, became a character that I was very, like, protective over. Like, he was definitely a character that I was very particular about how I portrayed him. And I knew, like, I spent a long time on all of his dialogue, and even like I'd be shooting the scenes and I'd be changing the lines like as I was shooting them to you know, kind of better fit what I thought the scene should be. Just because like if there was anything in the show that I felt needed to be right, it was that character. So he's up there. I think also I ended up finding a lot of good stuff with Flash. Flash kind of ended up being the weird like fan favorite character that I didn't anticipate. I think that's solely just due to Airborne Productions' performance. But a lot of people seem to really vibe with Flash, and I'm happy because I did end up kind of finding some cool stuff to do with Flash. I mean, pretty early on I had the idea that their relationship would be something that you kind of follow throughout the season, and I specifically had in mind the scene that they have in the finale where they actually kind of reconcile, which is definitely kind of based on the scene from The Amazing Spider-Man, where you get to see that like, oh, these aren't like great people, like they're both kind of messed up in a little bit of a way, but they are ultimately still people, and they, you know, I wanted a chance to show that kind of that humanity shine through.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I think all of the characters kind of get a nice amount of time to shine through. The commitment in this season to telling a more detailed, sort of well-paced origin, and then I find it interesting that Peter kind of becomes Spider-Man at the very end of season 1. You know, I think that really speaks to just how much time we've spent with the characters, and it kind of interestingly enough sort of takes on a more somber tone than what we've seen so far in season 2. And I was gonna ask, like, what kind of led to the decision to sort of swap tones moving into season 2 from what we have here.
Yeah, so I mean, you definitely noticed, like, I spent a long time kind of poring over what season 2 would be, and the truth is that I was very much set on what the entire show was going to look like when I was making this season. Like, when I was making this season, by the time I finished episode 4, I already had an episode 1 of season 2 written, and I mean, not just that I had season 2 planned out, I had season 3 planned out, I had the whole, like, I had 2 other films planned out. Like, I knew exactly what I wanted the show to be, and I actually animated a lot of season 2 episode 1, like of the original draft, and somewhere along the way, I just got like very, I don't know, just kind of lost, and like I was just really like unmotivated, and I was kind of like, okay, maybe I just need to take some time away, because at that point I've been doing Spider-Man, like I've been working on that show consistently for an entire year, and even before that I've been trying to get the show off the ground. Like even this season was like kind of a draft of like several different ideas. And so I took some time away. I did Suicide Squad, most notably.
Right.
And I kept trying to come back to it, and every time I was just getting hung up on the script, and I kept rewriting it and retooling it, and I was still always kind of keeping the same general like outline and general plot. And it was very like closely connected to season 1. Like it took place a couple weeks afterwards. And so it would have been following a very early Spider-Man.
Right.
And I remember it was when the video game Spider-Man 2 came out. I was playing that, and at that point I was in like such a rut. And I was playing that game, and I was just so into it. Like I was having so much fun. And at a certain point, like, I mean, the game's been out for a while, so I mean, you know, spoiler alert, I guess, but at a certain point Peter gets the anti-symbiote, or the anti-venom suit. And I remember like that moment happening, and I was just like, that's so like cool and creative that they did that. Like that is the type of Spider-Man story I want to tell. Like I want to just have the world open to me and like be able to just, you know, tell story. Like I'm not interested anymore in telling the origin of Mysterio or telling the origin of Doc Ock. Like I just want to tell the stories of like you know, how Spider-Man defeats them. Mm-hmm. And then I was like just kind of like, well, like I could just do that. like no one's holding me back. Like I can just tell that story. And so I did. And I talked to Josh, who has kind of been the, you know, the co-writer of season 2, and is, you know, really sort of everyone in the MLU's rock, really.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, like, for the first time I was having trouble coming up with stuff, not because I couldn't think of anything, but because I had too much. Like I had too many ideas. I had too many episode ideas. Like once I decided, okay, we're gonna do an experience Spider-Man. We're gonna skip all this. You know, we're not gonna do any more origins. We're just gonna jump ahead and to show like what his new world looks like. Like once those gates were opened, I had so many more ideas, and I was having so much more fun. And really, I ended up kind of, and now I kind of feel like I'm telling a more worthwhile Spider-Man experience.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean the biggest motivation was just it was more fun, and really I feel like I'm able to do more. And the story I initially had in mind, I'm still carrying. I brought some of that over into this season, so it's not entirely lost. And you know, maybe one day we'll get to go back and see kind of exactly what that story would have been, because I think there's some good stuff in there. But I think latching it on too harshly, or I think connecting it too much to this first season ended up being a little bit, not detrimental, because I think that the story itself was fine, but definitely what we're doing now is a little bit more freeing, I guess, just creatively for me.
Oh yeah. So like, if you could like change it, would you have done the origin and then kind of like by extension sort of strapped yourself to that like original part where you were writing the kind of the beginnings of Spider-Man, or would you have maybe jumped like more into this later stuff immediately?
I think if I could just clean everything up, I would have probably done this first season, and then I think the best move would have been to go and do what I'm doing now, and just launch right into it. You know, like, this is the origin. Now we shift focus into, you know, this was the past, this is the present. And I think there's still a place for that younger Spider-Man story, especially now. Like, now that I've had the time to step away from it, I think I've got a lot more ideas, and it's actually something I kind of want to tell now. Just because now it's like, I kind of know what the origin was. Well, I know what the origin was, and now I know what the future is like. And so there's a lot more room to play with with that kind of in-between stuff. And also, I just, since writing this season, I've read a lot more. Like, I've become a lot more invested in the character. Like, I've read a lot more stuff. I've just immersed myself in a lot more, like, Spider-Man material. And so there's a lot more stuff I just want to play with. Like, I definitely think if I were to go back and tell a story, I'd be really interested to see, like, Peter's beginnings at the Daily Bugle and his relationship with Betty Brant. And so, you know, and all of this, you know, you can kind of see too, because I set some of that up in season 2.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some of that present for sure. There's also a couple of things that, you know, have been dropped from this season.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, I think overall it carries over pretty well. But like, definitely the inclusion of Gwen Stacy is definitely something that's been talked about a lot.
Yeah, people have definitely asked me about that one, and yeah, that's like I like this season enough. I think, you know, nothing's perfect, and I think as creators we always look on our stuff a little bit more critically than other people. And yeah, the Gwen Stacy stuff does stand out as being like a particular blight on it. It's just like, if there's anything I could take away, it'd be that. Because the truth is that for a very long time, Gwen was going to be sort of the long-standing love interest of the show, and I ultimately kind of realized that what I wanted to do with the character was something that, number one, was something that I could bring over into. It wasn't particularly special. It was something it was a type of character that I could really bring into any sort of love interest character. And there was one specific idea that I was really latching onto, and I was just kind of like, you know, I don't think it's worth this one idea, which I thought was cool, but I don't think it's worth this one thing to go do this, especially when I had more what I thought were more interesting ways to tackle the romance with like Mary Jane and some other characters that you know we're gonna get to explore a little bit more in season 2.
Right. Yeah, I know, because I remember at the time you were very set on Gwen as the love interest. But like, what kind of like changed your mind on that, and in terms of like what made you decide to include Mary Jane in season 2?
So I was reading the Spider-Man run from the 90s by J. Michael Straczynski. And in that run, Peter and MJ are married, and their marriage plays a very big part in that run. And I was able to distinguish the characters. And what I really liked about MJ was this character, is that she's a character that it's the one person in Peter Parker's life that doesn't make him feel bad about being Spider-Man. You know, characters like Aunt May are even kind of guilty of this, but they don't realize it, of course. But it's the one person in his life that he doesn't have to feel sorry about leaving, and obviously he does feel sorry about it. But he knows that like she's not going to resent him. Right. I think there's definitely interesting stories to be told with Gwen. I like the idea of a character that holds Peter a little bit more accountable to like certain commitments, and like I said, there's definitely stories to be told with that. But as soon as I kind of toyed with the idea of using MJ for the show, it was like it was just kind of one of those things where it was like, oh, once I had that, a lot of pieces started to fall into place, and the arc that we're telling in season 2 is definitely not something I could have told with Gwen. I
see, yeah. So that kind of changed with the shift in the season 2 plans, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think I don't, because I think when we went back to the drawing board, I pretty much said to Josh, I was like, you know what, let's take everything we have, we're gonna get rid of. We're not gonna lock ourselves down to any idea that I had. Like, nothing is sacred. The only thing that is reserved is that Uncle Ben died and Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Everything else is fair game to change.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, Josh has always been a big champion that we use MJ, and at that point, I felt like I had a story to tell. I think that was probably why I used Gwen in the first place, is because I had an idea for her character, and I really just didn't feel like I had a story to tell with MJ.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Like as the production of the show has progressed, you've read more and become more sort of well versed in the Spider-Man comics. So I can see how that would kind of change over time. It is interesting to look back on the plans that kind of used to be there for future Spider-Man seasons, because I remember talking about those, and some of them I think have carried over. So I don't want to harp on them like, too much to like spoil anything, but
I would say like season 3 is like this season changed a lot. Season 2 changed a lot, but like season 3 onwards, those plans have like definitely shifted, but like largely it's sort of remained the same.
Yeah, no, that's mainly what I was talking about, is the more long range plans, I think, have been pretty similar. But
yeah, like I had for season 3, like I kind of knew what I wanted to do, like what I wanted the villain to be, and so that's always been like I've always kind of had that in the background, like all right, this is what we'll do for season 3, and then I do have an idea for like what the finale of the show will be, and so in a way everything has always kind of been building around that idea. Even though I said like when we did season 2 and we're like, all right, nothing is sacred, like I kept true to my word, but you know, once we figured it out, I was like, this is actually like, okay, this is how I'll connect it to this idea I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it works out well. I think there's definitely like some great elements from this season that carry over into season 2. Like, I like Peter and Harry's relationship, and I think that is a nice bridge between the seasons, even though there's like a significant time gap. Those kinds of things I think anchor the shows together. Obviously, Flash shows up again, and Aunt May, and you know, those types of characters. But it's cool. It's I think it works. It's an interesting way to tell the story, for sure. And I kind of like the shift in focus that we jumped ahead and kind of got to do some of that. What I think are more interesting stories, because some of that like early origin stuff of like the villains and stuff we've seen a lot. Not that it wouldn't be interesting to go back to that, but I do like kind of the focus on some of the later Spider-Man stuff that you're going into.
Yeah, and it's like not to like certain movies and stuff have kind of like gone out of their way to like give some of the characters a little bit more interesting backgrounds, but like just looking at some of the comics, like a lot of the origins of the villains are like not particularly deep. Like that wasn't really the focus, and so like like Sandman is a great example where it's like, you know, what they kind of did with him in the Raimi movie is like a really interesting, like I think it's a really nice sort of like introducing this idea that he had a child and she's sick and he's not really a bad guy, but he's doing it for, you know, he's doing a bad thing for a good reason. Like I think that's really interesting, but it's kind of like I don't really have anything new to add to that, and I kind of like the idea that you just kind of detach your, you know, I like the idea of writing villains that are just evil and they're just doing bad things and they don't really have these grand tragic backstories. That doesn't mean that they don't have like depth to them and they don't have like subtleties, but the concept of or the potential of like just kind of letting loose and you know doing an episode where Peter just gets to go off to Florida because the lizard is there, like that felt that just felt very creatively interesting. Yeah, no,
it's fun stuff for sure. So I've got a couple smaller little details I want to talk about in this season. The first one is something we haven't brought up for a while, but the poster that Peter knocks off his wall in the one scene, and then he kind of puts it back up in the end. What was the kind of the inspiration behind that?
So it was something that Fred suggested, Fineline, who does Daredevil, Guardian Devil for the MOU. In episode 1, he throws a book at it, and there's not anything special about that. Like that wasn't anything specific. It was just like, oh, we got angry and he threw something.
Right.
And then it just sort of became sort of unintentionally a recurring visual thing, because obviously in episode 4, when he has another kind of lash out, he throws it. And I remember I had this idea that there was going to be this big montage at the end of the episode where we see Peter sort of putting everything back together and becoming Spider-Man. And Fred was like very heavily like suggesting that I should have a shot where he puts that poster back up, kind of as a sort of a visual statement of like, oh, he's like, we see him sort of putting together this new life, but he's also sort of repairing the one he's already living, and he's kind of trying to put these things to rest and sort of repent for the way he's acted previously.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice scene. Speaking of scenes, we're at I believe this is the big argument between Peter and Ben here. I just wanted to point out that I really like this scene. I think it the way that you kind of like voice Peter in this scene and when he's lashing out, it felt very, I think, like real and like coming from a real place, and he felt genuinely kind of angry, and I think that was just like really well done, well written, and also just well acted. So yeah, I mean, I appreciate that, because that, like, if any scene, I think this is like, for the most part, I don't rewrite my stuff too much. Like, normally I just kind of toil over one draft, and if changes need to be made, I'll make them. But this like scene, like, it underwent a lot of changes, and as I mentioned, I was always kind of constantly changing Peter and Ben's dialogue, and this was, if there was any scene that needed to be right, it felt like it was this one. Oh yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I spent a long time on here, and I tried to put a lot into the voice acting, because in a lot of ways I was writing about like real emotions and things I did feel were relatable, and were kind of coming from a personal place, and I was very like, I wanted it to feel natural. Like, that's always been my thing with dialogue, is I always want it to feel very natural, or at least has to be spoken in a way that's natural. Like, maybe the things that people say are not something that normal people would say, but it has to come about in a natural way. And that was especially true for when he says, with great power comes great responsibility. Like, I knew that line had to come out in a way that was impactful, but it didn't just feel like he was just saying it to say it. Like, I needed to kind of, I really wanted to convey the importance of it. And so that's why they kind of like, he kind of the whole conversation has really been explaining the idea of that sentiment before he actually says it.
Yeah, no, it's really great. It comes off, I think, very authentically. So probably one of my favorite scenes in the season.
Me as well. Yeah, I think this is definitely one that I was particularly proud of.
Yeah. And it's nice again that we've had the build up of the previous two episodes to get to this point, where it doesn't really feel, sometimes they'll tend to rush through these moments in the movies and stuff like that, but like this, it feels like there's been a build up. It feels like there's been kind of that tension building between them, and that makes it feel even more impactful. So really well done. The other kind of smaller note I wanted to mention is the suit evolution. We see a suit at the end of the show, and then obviously when we get to season 2, it's a different suit. Two things, like, obviously, what was the what was the inspiration to change the suit, and then I know there was like a little bit of an attempting to disguise that we were changing the suit as season 2 was coming out.
Yeah, so to kind of like to kind of shock the audience a little bit, I kind of wanted to hide the fact that there was the time gap. Like, I didn't want people to know that going in, and I spent a long time trying to come up with a version of the suit that felt unique and something that was kind of like different. Like, I wanted, because there was so much, there was going to be so much build up to that moment, that I was like, I don't want to just use any Spider-Man figure, because I didn't think it really necessarily mattered. Like, I didn't think anyone was going to like call me out on it, but I was like, I feel like I want to make this like a big moment, a moment that feels like it has a lot of fanfare in it, and it's like you're like, oh my god, it's Spider-Man, just because you've spent so long. And like I said, the original plan for season 2 was to follow the season very closely, and so that was the plan. Like, originally you would have gotten to see a lot more of this suit, but obviously we ended up doing a time change, and I was like, well, I kind of want all of the characters to sort of feel like they've evolved, and that's why everyone kind of gets a little bit of a redesign. The faces get to be a little bit more modern, and I was like, well, that should be the same for the suit, because I also have, it's 5 years. I figured he would have changed the suit, and I also have kind of an idea of certain events that would have happened in that 5 years, and I think there's some of those I think would lead to just a natural redesign of his original costume. And also for episode 1, I thought, I kind of had this idea of like, we'll start easy, we got to rebuild the status quo. And so I had this idea of like, what if, because I actually really like Vulture. I've spoken about this in private before, but I really, really like Vulture, and I want to do a Vulture episode, and I thought it would be kind of funny, because there's also like the brick film cliche of like, we're going to use Vulture for episode 1, because he's an easy character to use. And so I like the idea of like kind of subverting that and trying to tell like an emotional story with Vulture.
Yeah.
And so him being sick is something that they've been kind of toying around with for a minute now with like the comics and different pieces of media. But I was like, well, this would be a good way to sort of bring about, or to this would be a good way to sort of explain some of the gaps, and an easy way to visually show us like when we're in a flashback and when we're in the present day.
Oh yeah, no, it's that was, I think, a good choice. The first episode being a sort of looking back through the framing device of like Spidey's encounters with Vulture. It does a good job of kind of like making it clear to the audience what we're doing. So yeah, definitely. And
definitely good. I also feel like the head for this season, like I think the two different suits definitely like sort of showcase different like versions of Peter. Like, I think you look at the new one and it just looks like it's a more experienced Peter. Like, I think that the big eyes in that first suit kind of lend itself well to like, oh, this is a sort of a more youthful version of the character.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. So, on that topic of the sort of the interim period, you said earlier that you'd be interested in potentially going back and doing some of that more early Spider-Man stuff. What sorts of events do you kind of have in your head that happened in between season 1 and 2 that you might want to like tackle in the future?
So one thing, like, I think sort of what I imagine a big part of it would be, because originally this was intended to be like Peter was supposed to be a senior in high school, and then we were like, well, okay, we're gonna retool this a little bit, we're gonna do a 5-year time gap, we want to do a college age Peter, let's kind of move this back. So I think Peter is technically like a sophomore or a junior in high school when this happens, and so I'd be really interested in exploring this idea of like, what does it look like, what does the pressure of being a superhero do to a kid? Like, what does someone who is 16 or 17, like, how does it feel for them to be like, to literally have this weight on their shoulders of like, it, what I do literally decides whether or not people live or die. So I think that would be like a big thing, and especially because it's like, he's also a high school student, so he also has to balance class, and he has to balance, getting home on time. Like, I think there's a very like fun little things to play with. It's like, oh, I'm a superhero. I'm doing these big things and saving people, but my Aunt May is gonna ground me if I don't get home in time. So I think just playing with stuff like that, like telling a very classic story, I think would be fun. I think like telling the story of how he got to the Daily Bugle and the sort of frustrations of a romance with Betty Brant would be really fun. I've been really like interested recently, just like writing romance and writing just different characters, and I think there'd be a lot of interesting stuff to pull on, because I mentioned that MJ is I find interesting because she kind of alleviates the pressure that Peter and the guilt that Peter feels for like constantly leaving her. I think it'd be interesting to do a character like Betty Brant, who's not like that, and not because she's selfish. It's just because she doesn't understand that Peter is Spider-Man, and so she's not expecting anything more than just a normal relationship. But Peter obviously can't give that to her. And sort of seeing that relationship would be interesting. And then I think just playing with the doubt, because I think there, I mean, I'm 20 now. I'm in college. I have doubts all the times about things that I've done in my past and things that I'm doing right now. And so I think it would be interesting. Like, definitely someone who's 16 or 17 would absolutely be having, if they were like, okay, I'm going to devote my life to fighting crime, like playing with the idea of like, well, because it's like, it's all well and good until your girlfriend dumps you or your mom is effectively mad at you. It's like, what do you how do those priorities shift, and how do they change, and how do they stay the same when you've got such a tremendous weight on you? I think like all of that would be really fun to explore.
Oh yeah, definitely. So then, like, kind of going off of that, were there any like changes to like the villains roster that kind of moved on from those original plans to now, that you might want to like jump back on, or decide to leave behind? Like, were these always the villains you were planning, or did you change that a little bit?
Some kind of changed. In season 2, the original version of season 2, the big character, actually the big villain that kind of carried over from episode to episode was actually the Rhino.
Okay.
And it wasn't a very interesting, like, there wasn't much like, I wasn't telling necessarily a specific like origin for the Rhino or anything. He was just kind of a recurring character. And that was like the big one. I've always, really what I'm doing in season 2 now, like the characters I'm tackling are kind of just always, or they're just characters I've always kind of wanted to tackle, and kind of imagined I would be. Like, there wasn't anything specific. Like I said, I really liked the Vulture. I knew I wanted to do a Vulture episode. The Lizard has been one that's kind of always been floating about. Different versions of season 2 always sort of seem to have the Lizard involved in some way. So I knew that was like one that I really wanted to do, because there's several characters that I think are just kind of underrated, the Lizard among them. Other characters I'm really interested in tackling at some point are like Doc Ock, Electro, and Scorpion, I think, are all ones that I want to do, and will definitely be showing up in season 2 and beyond.
Oh yeah. So we have our big confrontation scene.
Yeah, pretty for the at the time a very like difficult scene, because like I was very like inexperienced with doing fight scenes, and there's a little bit of a scuffle in about every episode. In episode 1, Peter gets jumped at school. In episode 2, there's a fight at the party. In episode 3, it's the wrestling stuff. And every time it was like I would get to that scene and I would kind of slack on it and I would kind of cut it short. Like, originally in episode 2, that fight at the party was supposed to be like a very kind of drawn out affair.
Oh, okay.
That was gonna last a little bit long. Like, there was a whole section where basically like Peter got hit, but then he got back up and then he beat up on Flash, and I kind of just ended up like low-key getting a little lazy with it, and just being like, I don't know how to do any of this. And so this was like a big, I remember being like very, very proud of how this fight scene came out, because it was kind of one of the first fights that I'd really done, and I was still kind of actually mastering that sort of, some of those movements.
Oh yeah, no, I think it comes out really nice. The camera movements and everything, it's cool. This kind of moment of hesitation, I think, is nice too.
Yeah.
A little different than how we see it sometimes in other things.
Yeah, I'm always big on I do like me some montages, so I think there's like 2 of them in this one.
Oh yeah.
I was like, the truth is I'm cheap, and I'm really like picky about how I want people to interpret things, and I'm definitely not like a person that's like I'll leave it up to the audience's interpretation. Like, I'm kind of specific about like, this is what I wanted to convey, and I want you to know that this is what I was trying to convey. So, and I have to be careful sometimes, because I do think it might sometimes if you're not careful, it definitely can feel like you're kind of shoving it down the audience's throat, and I didn't want that to happen. But
Sure.
and I do tend to lean on a good old-fashioned montage sometimes.
Oh yeah, nothing wrong with a montage. Obviously, that carried over into Suicide Squad.
Yes.
Big montage at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, yeah, this is pretty well done here. You get to see all the moments with Peter and Ben, and you feel them because you've been there. You know. Again, I think that's the biggest strong.
This wasn't something that was in the original script. This was something that I was just kind of like in the moment when I was editing this scene. Originally, it was just a bit of Peter crying in his bedroom after the fact.
Oh.
I was kind of like, ooh, maybe I could. I had the music track selected. And I was like, this could go kind of longer.
Yeah.
But then kind of spun out from that.
Yeah, it's cool. Biggest strong suit of this season is that we kind of take our time with these characters and we get to see the kind of gradual evolution into Spider-Man. Feels a lot more impactful at the end because of that. What would you say? I guess on that topic was probably your favorite part looking back on this season. Like something you enjoyed animating or writing, or what do you think you look back on fondly with this?
There's a couple things. One scene that I've always really liked is, and I'm really happy that I included, is that there is a scene in episode 3 where you get to see May and Ben talk, and it's something I wish I would have included a little bit more of is them getting to talk.
Oh yeah.
But I was happy about that. Like, I'm glad that we got to, because like I said, I kind of wanted every character's perspective to get explored a little bit, and so I'm glad that we got to see Peter and Ben's relationship through the eyes of May, and we got to kind of see it through a different perspective than just theirs. So that's a scene I like. I do like the final kind of confrontation with the crook that killed Uncle Ben, just because it was a lot of firsts, and I think it turned out good, and I see it as sort of a stepping stone to some of the action that I was I've done since. And then definitely like the final scene, even though it's very short, with Spider-Man, finally unveiling his suit, was like I made a point that was like the last thing I was gonna shoot. Like I was gonna make sure I had everything done, and then I'd shoot that scene. Like I wanted that way, like I could feel, like it was like I got to feel the build up as well.
Right.
Because a lot of times I will shoot out of order, and so like I think in episode 1 that final scene, or like the scene of them eating dinner right before the end was like the first thing I shot, and like in this scene, or in this episode 4, like some of the later scenes were some of the first things that I shot, and so I wanted to make sure that like that was the scene that I kept for last, just because at that point it had been about a year in the making, and so it was nice to kind of to have that moment of like, yep, it's all like, here it is, it's over now, he's Spider-Man.
Oh yeah, definitely a catharsis there. Yeah, no, it's really good. I like that we get this kind of wrap up of like kind of seeing the aftermath of everything, which I think kind of can get skipped over in some adaptations, because after it happens, it's almost like you jump straight into, oh, he's Spider-Man now,
Yeah.
And now we kind of get to see how not just how Peter reacts, but how all of the characters are reacting. You get May's reaction, you get obviously Harry's reaction here. Flash kind of has this interesting moment, which I thought was cool. That Flash kind of didn't turn out to be the like one-note bully. I definitely like that. And it seems like people really latched onto that too.
Yeah, which I'm glad, because like I mentioned, that was like something I had kind of envisioned from the beginning as of being a thing. and yeah, I was definitely like, perspective has always been something that I've been interested in my writing, and like allowing characters to get to kind of explore their emotions and see how everyone reacts to different things. And so this episode, I think it definitely had like a second draft, which, like I said, is kind of rare sometimes because it was the finale and I did want to make sure I got everything right. But this is definitely also like one of the easier ones to come together, just because like by this point, I mean, all the hard work had been done, like killing Uncle Ben and building that and making sure it felt satisfying, or I guess not satisfying, but like felt appropriately upsetting, was definitely like the hardest thing. And so I knew that by kind of drawing out the aftermath of it and showing the audience like how everyone processes and copes with it, and the sort of the way that Peter's mind initially works out was would make the inevitable ending like that much more satisfying. And I also knew that I needed to do, not that I needed to, but I really wanted to do a scene between him and May, because that had kind of been lacking in a lot of the other, they have very small interactions throughout the majority of the season, just because I kind of knew that like going forward after this, May would get more screen time, and Uncle Ben obviously was like, everything he's gonna get is in this season. So but I did that said, I did want to include a moment where they get to talk about it in a more meaningful way, because obviously they have a scene kind of in the middle after Ben dies or before Peter decides to become Spider-Man, where she's like, oh, he'd be proud, and that's always like a very surface level like comment. And so I wanted to get a scene where they get to talk it out, and Peter kind of gets a moment to actually vent, because then I try to make it feel like a sort of a frustrating endeavor for him, because he can't really explain everything. Like, he can't really explain why he feels like it's his fault. Like any normal person is not going to blame Peter, but obviously he knows that he is the one to be at fault.
Right.
And so I wanted to have a moment where he doesn't come all the way undone, but he gets a chance to kind of spiral a little bit and be a little bit more truthful with her than he's able to be with other people.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting predicament he's put in, where he can't really express what he's going through. And I think there's a lot of, like, it's conveyed well in this, that like it's almost like a battle he's fighting alone, because even though there are people around him that are trying to support him, like none of them can really know what he's actually going through.
Right.
That's kind of an interesting dynamic you ever seen with Flash here. Yeah, I mean, I think it's overall really interesting, and it leads in nicely into what we're doing with season 2. I guess, is there anything you'd want to inform the MLU viewers about what's next for Spider-Man moving forward?
Oh boy, so let's think here. Season 2 is going to be the most adventurous I think the show is going to get, and obviously, like, at this point we're only 2 episodes in, so like I don't have too much to show at that point, but like the general vibe of season 2 is very much that of a Saturday morning kind of adventure, action adventure cartoon. Every episode is going to get to be a sort of unique adventure with Spider-Man. We're going to get to follow different characters, and so yeah, just like look out for something that's a lot more embracing of its like comic book nature. Like we're definitely going to get to see a lot more action, a lot more just superhero stuff. But I definitely want to still sort of hold on to the character-driven focus of this first season. I mean, obviously it's not going to be exactly that, because I think that I think there's a place for that sort of story, but I think that people would kill me if that's what I decided to do with my Spider-Man show. But that said, I do want there to be, at the heart. I mean, the story is only as good as the characters, and so at its heart, I definitely want to have a focus on on the characters, and we're definitely going to see people like MJ and people like May and Peter and Harry and all these different characters. You know, we're going to get to explore them a little bit more deeply than we have, and we're going to get to explore their relationships. And yeah, I mean, just, you know, be ready, because the train is not slowing down. I mean, I've got a lot of Spider-Man ideas. As I mentioned, I had a tricky I had a hard time like boiling everything down into one season, just because I had so many, because, you know, the episodes are kind of standalone, and I had too many, and so I boiled it down to 8. You know, we're gonna get 6 main episodes, and then a 2-part finale, and they're all gonna be kind of in that 22 to 25 minute range. So yeah, and then, I mean, that's that. Season 2, once we get to the end of Season 2, I'm sure we'll take a little bit of a break, because it's been quite a while since I've been working on this show. But there is going to be a Season 3. I won't say what Season 3 is going to be yet, because, you know, we're still pretty early on in Season 2. But there will be a Season 3, and there will be more after Season 3. I don't necessarily know what shape or form it's going to take, but my promise to the MOU audience is that I have always intended, and I fully will make the promise that Spider-Man, like this version of the character of Spider-Man, my version of Spider-Man, is going to get like a definitive, you know, climax. Like, he's going to get a definitive ending, and, you know, a proper finale. In what shape that will be, I have ideas. Like, I have a vision for where I would like him to end. It's hard to plan out things too exactly this far in the future. But he is going to get a finale, and a sort of a final send-off and a final adventure. So yeah, look forward to Spider-Man for many years to come. We're really only just kind of getting started with the character here.
Oh yes, many more exciting plans on the horizon. Actually,
and I guess I can also say, like, because I sort of intend to take certain breaks between episodes, or, you know, between seasons, like, it's, you know, the current, you know, the forever looming question of, like, yes, it is coming. It'll always be like, you know, until you see the finale and it says the end, it'll always, you know, it's always gonna be on a to be continued. And so there's always gonna be more. You don't, like, please don't ask me if episode 3 or, like, if that episode's coming, because it is. It's never canceled. But so, you know, like, Spider-Man will forever always be coming.
Oh yeah, we've actually gotten more Spider-Man than we maybe expected. He's shown up in a couple other projects more recently.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the cool thing now about, like, kind of where the MLU is at, like, just with more members and more projects, is that, yeah, the world's expanding, and Spider-Man is, you know, I mean, it is a small world, and so Spider-Man's definitely been showing up in other stuff, and some of his supporting characters have been showing up, and, you know, that's only going to continue. And so, yeah, I mean, be on the lookout, because he's definitely going to be in other stuff, and you know, other characters within the MLU might show up in Spider-Man. So, like, in a universe as connected as the Marvel universe, it's only natural that eventually Spider-Man would cross paths with different heroes and such, and get the opportunity to cross over. So,
oh yeah, yep, it's an exciting road ahead for the MLU Spider-Man.
It is indeed.
Well, I mean, I guess that's all the questions I had. Was there anything else you'd kind of want to say before we wrap up here?
You know, I think we've hit a bulk of it. I mean, it's kind of crazy to look at this now, because it's I mean, as a recording, this is 2025, and this was published in October of 2022. So, you know, this fall it's going to be 3 years since this thing hit YouTube, which is, like, really, like, weird to think about.
Yeah.
That this is, and I'm sure you can relate too, because, I mean, if this was out 3 years ago, then, like, Iron Man 1 is definitely, like, about that old as well.
Yeah. It's weird how much time has passed since this. It
Yeah.
doesn't feel like that long, but
Brick films are fun that way because it's like I can definitely look back at this and not necessarily, you know, I look back at certain stuff and I don't necessarily know like where I was when I was filming this scene or stuff like that. I mean, there's some examples of that, but like, I definitely can look back on this and remember kind of the different, like the place I was I was in at the time, like where I was just as a person, and it's pretty like. It's pretty weird to look back on this and like now, especially like as just an actual adult, and kind of look back on what I was doing in my high school years. It's like it's a very odd feeling that like 3 years later, or nearly 3 years later, this story is still unfolding.
yeah, it's hard to imagine just how long this has been in the works and how much time has passed. It's weird to think.
Yeah.
How long the MLU has been around and how long we've all been working on our respective characters, but it's only gets more exciting to come.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know, it's cool. I mean, the MLU seems to be doing just fine, and really, like, I think we're really starting to hit our stride, and like I said, that world is a small one, but it's starting to become a lot bigger, and it's starting to definitely fill up with characters, which is very exciting.
Oh yeah.
The future is bright for the MLU.
Indeed it is. And the future is bright for these behind the scenes commentaries. We have more in store.
That's right.
Definitely excited to do the season 2 one as well when we get there. I'm sure you'll have even more to talk about.
Oh boy, will I? Because that one like there's some stuff in there I think people might be interested in hearing about, and I can definitely yap about for a bit. So
I look forward to hearing it. And Spider-Man will return.
Oh yeah.
There we are. Well, on that note, I think that will probably do it for this behind-the-scenes look at Spider-Man Amazing Fantasy Season 1. Thank you for watching. Of course, I've been joined by Gravity Films 4, the creator of the series, and I've been Greenleaf Productions. And we'll see you in the next one, hopefully.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.